Welcome to our U podcast. Paul, I'm a little bit disappointed that we're in a fancy podcast studio and not in the basement in Dublin Street with our toilet sound effects and our flapjacks. What's going on?
I was thinking about hiring some urinals to flush on a regular basis so we'd feel at home. So I apologise.
Yeah, I feel like we got Heather here, our guest today.
False pretense.
False pretenses. Yeah.
I must say I was looking forward to the toilet.
Yeah. And you know, we should probably introduce our guest today. This is Dr. Heather. And welcome to our podcast, our posh podcast today.
Podcast. Thank you.
And we're delighted to have you here with us. We apologise that it's not in our little cube of horror in Dublin Street. We will unveil it at some point. But today you get the star treatment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And we are really genuinely delighted that you could come and talk to us a bit about your career, your interests, just about you.
No pressure.
No pressure, no.
And you've brought someone along with you.
Yes.
Now, Paul and I know who your guest,
Yeah.
your student
Mini
is.
guest.
Mini guest.
A sub guest.
Our sub-guest. Annie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm Ene Alu. I'm a student at Aberdeen, Masters Public Health, and I'm taking a course with Heather. That's my work-based placement, which is how I met the both of you, because in training with You Understood, which has been a very amazing experience. But I'm not on my own. One girl would have been here with us, but unfortunately, due to other tasks, she couldn't be here. So thank you.
Yeah, and maybe Wongle has won a watch a little bit and not been pulled into this podcast. You know,
I'm sure she'd be very excited. Like, oh, thank God, yeah.
Where would we fit the other seat?
That's a good point. Where would we fit the other seat?
That's true.
So Heather, let's get into it.
Okay, let's go. Let's do this.
Let's do this. Let's get serious for a minute. And one of the things that really kind of interests me as part of the kind of research team at U, and I like to call myself a pseudo academic at U, is just your research. It's so broad and varied, and when I read about your research, everything seems to be covered, and that's a compliment. I think you just seem to have this expansive range of research, and what would be interesting, I think, for everyone who's listening and watching this podcast would just be to hear about, you know, what you're currently researching, a bit about your previous work, what interests you.
Yep.
And maybe just thread a bit through about, you know, why.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting actually on the train down this morning that we had a bit of a conversation about exactly that. So hopefully I've rehearsed well enough.
You have, trust me.
And I have to say the phrase of the day has to be, it makes sense backwards.
That's the fourth time it's been
That's
said today.
But I suppose I don't know whether to tell the story forwards or backwards now. So I work at my main interest is in digital health, and my main research is in digital health. And I suppose I've always been interested in technology, earlier adopter of technology. And I mean, we had a computer when I was a kid in the loft, and I spent so much time in the loft, which was not decorated. I mean, it was like wooden, you know, floorboards and things. That I would sneak up the ladder to go in the loft and play on the computer. I've always loved technology. And then I suppose digital technology, I'm just very excited about wearable tech, apps, health, now working in applied health sciences. But my undergraduate degree is in law.
Okay.
I left school when, you know, they were like, law or medicine. I'm really clumsy, I'm really squeamish, so it wasn't medicine. So I ended up doing a law degree and at the end not wanting to be a lawyer. And I suppose I went back into university thinking, what can I... And I suppose in part this is why maybe my research is broad, because I have different disciplines coming in. So I then studied gender studies, philosophy, and then worked in social sciences, criminology, then when I finished my PhD, which had been exploring the use of surveillance technology in policing and prisons, I was still really interested in technology and like public service delivery, but I didn't see a lot of tech in the health space. And this job came up that kind of combined gender, technology, and the use of like health interventions that involved technology in some ways, that I thought, I can maybe apply some of my, bring some of the things together here. And this is 10 years ago. Went into health sciences, never having studied health sciences before, and then kind of enjoyed that so much and learned so much about the different methods of doing research, and was able to really explore methodologically the different ways of doing research, and really got a baptism of fire, I guess, in that research space. And then started taking it forward, really my interest in digital, looking at my own experiences of self-tracking and various different technology uses over the years and blogging about them. And then really starting to do systematic studies, and particularly with students. I mean, to me, working with students is such a great thing in the university space, but people come in with ideas or different perspectives and you can shape new projects. So a lot of the work that I've done recently has been around digital health. So we've used wearable devices, we've used app-based exercise programs and evaluated them. We've done things like looking at regulation around artificial intelligence. So my legal background comes into that, and the kind of philosophy of, just because we can, does that mean we should? Those questions. Yeah. We have recently built a prototype drone, like an ambulance drone, because I'm all about just explore and, burst through disciplines. And, I had a student who really loves hill walking, but she's a doctor, medical doctor. And she's like, I'm really interested in drones. So we did the boring stuff. We did the literature reviewing, but then we built a drone. Like we sat in a room together and built this drone.
Very cool.
And now we're taking that work forward, and it's just, and that's working with industry partners and like yourself. To me, my job title is lecturer in applied health sciences, and the applied bit is the thing to me. I mean, yes, we do the work in the university, but it's actually what's going on out in the world. How can we partner up with people? How can we get the research out there and doing stuff that's useful, that's meaningful, that helps push things forward? So yeah, I don't know if that's it in a nutshell.
I'm exhausted just listening to it.
It's a big nutshell. Wow. Okay. And I think, and Paul, you'll agree with this. It's the applied bit, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's the what can you do? Yep. The doing. And I think we talk about this often, that it's the benefits that you can bring to people. Yep. So the research is one part, and it's such a fundamentally huge part of what you do and what we do, what Annie is bringing to the party here. But it's the getting it into people's hands and the working with people. Yep. And you talked there a lot about my ears perked up there when you talked about tracking and your passion for tracking. And we're quite passionate about tracking over here at You Understood. And what do you like about tracking? What do you dislike about tracking? We know that you've done that for a number of years.
Yeah, so I have tracked, and again, we were talking on the train. So I've actually tracked as a teenager using paper and pen. And I hadn't actually realised that I'd done that until I started using technology, and then thinking, there must be something about me, because I've done it. I used to have this book where I used to write down everything I'd eaten in a day and all the calories, and it was, now I've got an app that I just can scan things and type things in. But, period tracking, I've done that my whole life. I have, like over a decade of data, even 2 decades of data for that. I think that now with technology and the possibilities, it's become a lot easier, because in the beginning, wearable devices, I had Fitbits and Jawbones, and I've had technology designed for women, the necklaces and so on. And I use an Apple Watch just now, and it's getting easier and easier to track so many different things. But I think I've just seen the potential of tracking stuff. So the other thing that I've done as well is had genetic profiling. So I'm really interested in my health record. Yes, the stuff that is the official stuff that's been interactions with health professionals, but there's so much around health and self-management and insights that you can track for yourself, that I think I like the whole. It was interesting. There's a woman called Sarah Regar, and I think she's based in Finland, but she's got Parkinson's disease, and she talks about, I think she has 2 hours per year in reviews, and the rest of the time it's her. So all of those other, my maths is terrible. So how many other hours are there in a year?
A lot.
Yeah.
That's my maths. A lot. A lot.
That's good. That sounds good for me. But yeah, so she was sort of talking about, she tracks a lot of the stuff around her own sort of disease progression and the insights. And I was thinking, into the future, I can look at my genetic profile and say, right, okay, well, Parkinson's doesn't feature on that for me. But are there other things? And are there things that I could track across the life course that then I've got this data set that could be useful, again, backwards. So, while there might be nothing wrong at the moment, and I might not be tracking for any particular reason, I don't have any that I know of conditions that I'm managing. I'm just tracking lifestyle. And I guess we hear all the time about lifestyle is really important and lifestyle changes, or, obesity prevention, or, people need to be exercising more, eating better. And I think if people underestimate as well how much they do, and having those insights where you can quantify them, which is odd because I'm a qualitative researcher and numbers are really not my thing. But actually, it's less about the actual numbers. And I have had obsessions at times of have I done 10,000 steps today, or I've got targets, and I do have numerical targets that I do try to meet. But I suppose it's less about that and more about creating a data set that I can then look back and I can look at trends. And the thing that I find most frustrating is that there are a couple of apps where you can do cross tabs to look at relationships between things. But even as someone who tracks so much, it's very difficult to actually make any connections between things. Yeah. So, why on certain days am I more hungry, or have I eaten more than I probably should? Or, what is that related to my mood? Or is that because I've actually just done a really long run? Or, there are those kind of level things, but I want to be able to do more sophisticated things with my own data. And I also want my data to be useful in a healthcare context. I want that to be part of my story. I want the fact that I've got that genetic profile to be part of that. So everything kind of links up. And I take part in studies quite a lot where I just give data or share data as much as possible. I want it to be useful. And I think from sort of N of one study, it's useful for me in some ways, not very useful in other ways because I can't do stuff with it. But if everyone was tracking everything, I don't know, and maybe that's
I think there's something there. And so for me, it's a couple of things you've said, and I love all this stuff. And I know we might get time to talk about the running stuff that we do later on. But what's really interesting to me is you talked about your medical records. And for everyone here, that's a snapshot in time when we will have had an issue or a challenge in our lives physically. If you look at the running analogy, the events that we get, the medals that we get, that's the end of a very long and complicated story. And we capture the end, the medal moment, right? And there's something about, again, the matter, most of the matter in the universe that we don't understand is dark matter. And that's the majority of it. Mm-hmm. And there's something there about data that's unseen, giving us the explanation for the stuff that we capture. Yep. So by the time we get to the doctors, actually, what is it that took us there? What is it that got us there? What's the context? And for me, I'm with you. If we could track as many inputs as possible that may seem innocuous at the time and unnecessary, who knows? They may actually hold the key to why we're there at the end, if that makes sense, right? So often it's the data that's not there that is the important data, if that makes any kind of sense.
Absolutely. And we talk all the time between ourselves about, and we've spoken before, Heather, about no one knows ourselves better than us. Mm-hmm. And if we can give people a platform through whatever that is, paper and pen, an app, talking to someone that knows them really well, to reflect back to them and say, actually, you're not doing really well, or actually you're having a great day, because we overlook that too. And we say, that journey is really important. Mm-hmm. And actually giving them that awareness is really important. And I think that's ultimately our aspiration that you understood, and your aspiration through your students. And I think that's really our end goal. Well, actually, it will never be an end goal, because if we do this right, we'll be continually changing as technology advances. Yes. Yeah. And as people grow greater awareness, they'll hopefully the ambition and the aspiration will be to want more of this. Mm-hmm.
Do you get technology fatigue? You're tracking so many things. It's a bit like, again, in my world, there's so many different platforms that offer the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it's like, how many more platforms do we need, right? And I think we're probably coming towards that point in terms of social perception of being tracked. So have you experienced that, or do you think we're getting to that point, or actually do you think there's a lot of room yet for that to...
I think there's a lot of room yet.
Okay, yeah.
And I would say even so let's just focus on the last couple of years. So I took on additional tracking because I took part in several COVID studies, and scheduled a time every morning where I just sat and did all the data entry, and that's like what I did because I thought it could be useful, to giving data for analysis. And at the early point in the pandemic as well, it was sort of prospective rather than, there weren't necessarily research questions. It was just, let's have the data. And so, no, I don't. And it's funny because people quite often say to me, you're maybe a bit obsessive about, could you take the technology off? Could you? I get really, really stressed, like when I have to charge the things. And they're not on me, and then they're not capturing.
Because you're missing the data, right?
Yeah. And it's currently stressing me that I know that I'm going to have to remember what I ate for lunch and put it into my app because I didn't do it when we were eating lunch. So, I've had an extra glass of water that I need to make sure that I track. So it's like that to me, it's very important to have that there. I don't know why. I mean, it's weird.
But I've got to say, so is that about tracking it? Or is it actually about having the ability to reflect on it and draw conclusion at some point in the future that might not be a given time? You just want that data to be as accurate as possible for when that time comes. Is that where the anxiousness, or is it just habitual anxiousness to say, damn, that's something I always do and I haven't done it, so that's a black mark?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. But what I would say is, I think having the accurate record is more important. So I think it is both. But I think for me, like being able to look back and having a complete, I don't want an incomplete record. Like, it's that. It's kind of like, why would I track 4 glasses of water but not 6? Like, what's the point in having that? So there's no point. So unless it's a complete record, there's no point.
It's ruined. It's ruined.
It is. But it's funny, isn't it? Because I had a similar conversation with you and one of our colleagues in a car park, funny enough, when we came out of a student presentation.
Yeah.
And I said, actually, I feel quite guilty when I don't track my mood diary, my mood tracking. And I've tracked that for over 2,000 days, and I feel like, when I don't track my mood, I feel like, I've missed a day, there's a spot missing. However, I know that it's very important for me to keep a track of my mood because it impacts on my awareness of my mood fluctuations.
Yeah.
So I know if I miss a day, that might become 2 days, that might become 3 days, and I know that that's important for me to keep an eye on things.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a kind of maybe guilt's the wrong word, but the guilt, I'm going to call it guilt, but the guilt is actually helpful for me.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe we should think about that then, as we know that it takes commitment to track.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges that any digital health platform technology faces is this kind of commitment barrier. Why should I do it? Why should I track my mood or my menstrual cycle or my food? Why should I do it? And how do you get past that point where you realize, or you get to a point where you think, this is actually helpful for me? Where does it become habit? Does it become that guilt, or that sort of that point of where you get to the top of the mountain and you go over it? Or do you think it takes a type of personality, or do you have to have a challenge first?
I'd also say you can capture all the data you want about anything you want. The key question for me is, when you're faced with that data, is that going to change your behavior?
Yeah.
So is that going to change anything about your habits and behaviors moving forward beyond the point of reflection? Yeah. And that's the key thing, because if it doesn't, the value of that data surely is almost entertainment versus impactful.
Yeah. And are you going into something looking for change or just for
Interest.
Just for,
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So I wrote a blog post a few years ago. It was a reflection. So I had a kind of history of like starting running and then giving up, and like I would do it for a bit and then I'd give up, then I'd do it for a bit, give up, do it. And then I lecture on an undergraduate course on exercise and sports science. And the 2 lectures that I was asked, can you give these 2 lectures? One of them is motivation to exercise. One of them is adherence to exercise. And I loved the motivation lecture because I was like, yeah, and I always felt like such a fraud when I did the adherence one, because I just like over a 10-year period, like started running, stopped running, started. Yeah. So in 2018, I gave that adherence lecture and I made a vow, I'm not going to stop running. And since then, I didn't until I had my accident in November running a marathon. I did 3.5 years of continuous running. And so to me, tracking was really, so it's not just the kind of passive tracking that you can do because the device is doing it. It's an active like switch on Strava. It's capturing that. We've had a conversation before. I hate Strava. but
there are other apps. Disclaimer. Yeah.
But yeah, that's the one I use for running. And I mean, it's like, you know, I reflect on that every year. It's actually really nice doing those 2 lectures every year. They tend to happen in early March. And it's just like then seeing that data have been built up. And, you know, I think that's really about anything, like motivation, maybe to track in the first instance. But I think there needs to be engagement with it. I think I really like the fact that the food thing, you have to manually do, like, because it's an active exercise. It's something that you have to think about doing. You have to do, or I can wear this watch and it's doing stuff, you know, can wear this ring, it's doing stuff without me. And a few people have said things like, well, yeah, but do you not just, what's the point? Because it's just tracking in the background and, you know, do you look at it? I look at it all the time. Even though I know, you know, I know we've walked around Edinburgh today, you know, does it matter how many steps I've done or not? Well, yeah, it does to me, actually. It does. It's important to me.
But the autonomous tracking, which is the easy bit because you don't have to think about it, versus the conscious manual tracking, I think there's a huge difference in those 2 things. Mm-hmm. So one's a lower barrier to entry, right? Because it's just tracking, giving you data without any effort at all. And there's still an opportunity to reflect. Yeah. The other one, you actually have to think and engage in the capture of that data. And the very act of reflecting on that as you're inputting it is powerful in itself, no matter where the data is coming from. Yep. Because you've got to take time away from what you're doing to make sure that data's input and it's input correctly, so that when you do get the reflective moment, it's as powerful as it can be.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think for like physical change and like dietary change, you know, a lot of exercise applications are out there, but then there are a few that stand out because it actually gets you involved and allows you to participate. Apple does this thing where it started off with tracking your steps. Then all of a sudden, it started tracking how much you climb, how well you sleep, and we don't know when we actually offer Apple to track all of our data. And then eventually you subconsciously pass through the health app. And then you see, oh, last year I was taking 1,000 steps per day. And this year I'm taking 500 steps per day. And you're like, why is that? Now that's for the physical because we understand the need to actually not live a sedentary life. Yeah. For mental health, it's the same thing. If there is an improved interest in understanding why there's a huge mood fluctuation, and I can actually go back through an application and see, oh, this is why this has happened, this is why this is reoccurring, I might then be much more interested in making conscious efforts to track and write down into an application. It might not be as easy. I mean, for dietary, you have to like, oh, I had 2 glasses today, or you have to go back and like, I had another glass, or I had another glass, and it's just the consciousness. And it's understanding that I need to drink water, or I need to be in my best mental state to be able to, function properly academically, or with my relationship, or with my dogs, or whatever. It's that realization that, oh, I have to be good, right? First, before if I'm not feeling good mentally, I don't think I would want to go for a run. if I'm feeling all gloomy and sad and or pressured or have so much on my mind, I might not consider my physical health.
And yes, it might be the best thing for you.
I was going to say, or it might be the opposite, because I know, like for running, for me, is like to clear my head, and that's my time, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
And like just having had a period of not being able to get, like, it's interesting because I had an accident and I couldn't walk, right? So I've had probably the lowest mood that I've had in my life over the last, since November. I made myself still wear this watch every day, even though I couldn't walk. Like I couldn't do any steps. I couldn't bend my knee. And that was stressing me out. But instead of giving up on the tracking or changing my targets, I just tried to make myself comfortable with those numbers just not being there, like going from, training for a marathon and all of that. And looking at people running and like thinking, okay, I will run again, but I can't at the moment. But it's still important to not give up on the tracking to me, because I can reflect on that period of time and know that that's what was happening then.
And taking control of what you can take control of is really important. And letting that stuff go, because it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you realise you can't physically go out and do the things you want to do, or mentally, that's so, it's like, it's a burden. It's a big burden. And I love what you said about correlations and identifying them, NA. And I wonder, again, back to the unseen data. So let's pick something that's really obvious is you get some good sleep and you feel great the next day versus getting 2 hours sleep and you don't feel great the next day. For us as human beings to make the correlation there and the connection between those two pieces of data is relatively straightforward. But as you kind of peel back the layers, there's some things that we do that we're in control of, or external bits like weather or social relationships or behaviors that we may have that we don't understand impacts on mental health in specific ways.
Yes.
And it's trying to use the technology or leverage the technology that's available to us to try and join those dots on our behalf, because we're not quite there yet. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a really fascinating thing, I think.
Yeah, because just like physical health, it took a while for a whole of campaign, or you need to go out, you need to take a walk, you need to take a run, you need to cycle more. Then the climate change happened, the acts began to come up, and then everyone was like, oh, let's cycle. Let's walk instead of taking cars. For mental health and emotional well-being, I think it requires the same amount of energy and movement. And just like you said, you can't say the reason I had 2 hours sleep today is related to this and this and this if you've not put it down somewhere. I mean, it might be difficult for you to reflect 2 days after it's passed, because you're like, I don't really remember. But if you actually had it put down, you're like, oh, I could just go back and be like, oh, this happened and this happened again this week, and hence the same outcome and same, reactions to it. Yeah. And I remember when we sent you a document and we read through some papers that if you have these things written down, you might feel, if you're going to approach a doctor or you want to relate with the doctor on a personal basis and you can't really remember, you can always say, oh, let me just check. And then you're like, oh, yes, so this happened. And hence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So it just requires the same energy from like the actors to like push. Yeah. And consistency is very key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we talk about one of our core values being investment.
Mm-hmm.
That investment in yourself. And consciousness.
Yeah.
I think there's, that thing about the conversation with the doctor, and we talked about medical records and things, that's just such and you use the word snapshot, Paul. And I think, you go, there's this, I don't know if it's a culture of, if there's something wrong, you go to the doctor and you get an answer, but actually you've got so many answers yourself. You know all of that stuff that you've been doing or not doing or feeling or the kind of, but actually having a record of that and being able to really pinpoint, like you said, the different points in time and being able to give that true account, that context to it is really, really important in you taking an active and participatory role in your health. We don't, that's empowerment, isn't it?
It's empowerment. But the thing that I guess challenges me is when we talk about physical health as individuals, we accept as a society all sorts of metrics, right?
Yeah.
So we'll get on the scales, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or how many pounds or kilos have we gained or lost? We'll track our heart rates. We'll go for runs because we understand that's physically good for us. We'll try and eat the best nutritional foods that we can, because we understand the link and the correlation between those foods and our physical health.
Yeah.
Where do we do that for our mental health? Where do we measure and track it? As a society, right? As individuals, I think some of us have got a better grip on it than others, but we don't seem to take the mental health. And by the way, when I talk about health, the two are intrinsically linked. There is no, you can't just be defined by mental health. You can't be defined by physical health.
Yeah.
Health is a combination of your mental and physical health.
Yeah.
But we have to change the narrative around mental health and enable and empower people to start tracking and being instilled with the right behaviours on their mental health, I think.
Yeah.
So I wonder then if this is a controversial question then when it comes to mental health. Have people been guided in terms of their physical health? Annie, you spoke a lot about, there's kind of been a campaign around physical health, get on your bike, get into the gyms, lots of gyms sprung up.
E-gyms all of a sudden.
Is the kind of empowerment, take control of your mental health, is it a bit pie in the sky? Are people looking to be guided more around mental health?
That's a really interesting question, I think, as well. Sorry, I don't know if you were going to jump in there. But...
No, because for physical health, I know right from kids in school, on these days you have to be on the field.
Yeah,
PE. PE. It's scheduled. Yeah. And right from, I do not know, maybe different context, but right from a tender age, home, you're trained to be strong. You're trained not to focus too much on your emotional and feelings, because if you focus and dwell on it, you might neglect so many things. But then it's the other way around, because you keep on pushing all of these things backwards, not reflecting upon them, not healing. And then a couple years, 18, 17, 20, you're like, well, now I'm crappy. And now I'm all messed up because they're all coming back and I can't handle it because there's so much pressure coming out from that door. Yeah. And yes, if from schools, your kids and you're trained on a daily basis to take some time, reflect on the relationships and the conversations you've had, reflect on what you ate, reflect on how, this analogy, how your fight with Kevin had an effect on how you ate during lunch, or how your arguments or conversation with your teacher. So you start that at a young age and it keeps growing. It keeps on, and then you pick these things up. And yes, I would say the enlightenment is very important. It's like a yin-yang relationship.
Yeah.
Emotional health has an impact on your physical health. Physical health has an impact on you. Yeah. There's not any can do without the other.
Right.
It's very important. So just like you mentioned, I might feel better when I go on a run, clear my head, but I might not be able to go. Someone else might not be able to go for a run because they have so much on their head.
Yeah. So it's all very unique, isn't it?
Very unique, to the individual,
And I know from my own experience working in mental health that there are school programs where they're trying to bring in emotional literacy and things like that to schools. Yeah. But I agree, it could be vastly improved and there could be more resources put into it. But I just wonder, are people still waiting for some guidance around how do we deal with it?
And
how do we engage?
Very interesting during the pandemic. The thing was you could go, certainly in the UK, the kind of advice was you could go out for a walk once a day. And several people got in touch and were like, I'm going for a walk once a day. I don't know why, I don't even like walking. Why? What am I doing what the government tells me to do? What? And then it was just that was the only thing that they could do, And so one friend in particular was like, so I've stopped. I'm not going out for a daily walk.
Why am I doing that?
But it's funny, the government say you can do that, so so few people do it. But
it was a guide, wasn't it?
It was a
guidance, yeah.
But and maybe, but not the explicit, or maybe so maybe in normal life when we're, pre-pandemic, we engage in walking or exercise behaviours because they make us feel good or because we enjoy them or whatever. But in that context, it's because we were stuck at home. Was that for our physical health or was that for our mental health that we were actually being encouraged to go out and do something? And but certainly the mental health, that didn't come across to me, the value of it in the mental health terms. It wasn't really explicit, or that the two might be joined. Actually staying at home might not be good for you, but we can't all mix. So you should go out and get exercise so you're not going stir crazy because you're like cabin fever. I don't think they were really discussed as openly as, reasons why you might go for a
Go
walk.
for a walk.
It doesn't make sense, does it?
No.
Because I would imagine, and I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine the vast majority of the population felt physical and mental benefits
Yeah.
from doing
From getting up.
from doing the walking.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we can't sit here and do our podcast without me getting on my pedestal again about mental health. Every time mental health is discussed, it's always bad.
Yeah.
Always bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not.
And it's not.
No.
And people, just like they experience good physical health, can be in prime condition mentally.
Absolutely.
And we should talk and we should celebrate and we should learn from those people. And the reality is those people will probably not stay there because physical health and mental health are very much both a journey, right? But changing the narrative around celebrating, perhaps that's too strong a word, but celebrating people with good mental health, it should be applauded and it should be embraced and recognised and championed because the reality is we're all going to face challenges. And, it comes to us all, some more challenging than others, but, let's celebrate when we're in a good place as well.
I agree.
And it takes time and effort sometimes to do that, conscious time and effort to get to a good place in the mental health space. And other times you're just fortunate enough to be there, I think.
Absolutely.
Being able to recognise it as well is, for
Just like you say,
yourself.
the same thing, to recognise that you're in a good space.
Yeah, and to be able to go, I know I feel, and also I think sharing. So I think a lot of people, it comes to crisis point maybe before someone shares something, or they've accessed a service, or it's become, the family members or friends have picked up on signals and things like that. But I think certainly for me, it's been very strange the last few months because I've really opened up about like the lower moments and the feelings and like making connections between things that. So it's been interesting because I think I have been fortunate to have good mental health for really like long time that I've just never really felt down. And recently I have, and I think that's been such a positive experience for me because I've had my confidence has been knocked. I've had low mood. I've felt very emotional about things, and it's been actually so challenging, but in a positive way. So actually we can also think about the challenges and the bad stuff as actually being really, because I'm like, wow, this is a whole side of myself I didn't know that was in me. Like, this is really quite cool. This is very, I haven't felt fear like that or anxiety like that before ever. Wow. And it's like,
here's a philosophical question then. By going through the challenge and by experiencing the bad mental health, I love that, bad mental health.
Let's say poor.
It's very important. Do you think that you appreciated where you had previously been more so because of going through those challenges? And is there something there around, again, maybe too philosophical, but society, almost, this prevalence of convenience, simplicity, easy access to everything? When you look historically back and compare, is there something about having things easier today and not really appreciating all of the things that we have? And I'm tying that back specifically to mental health. So when you talked about, you've been on a really good journey for a long time and all of a sudden you were knocked.
Yeah.
But I just wonder whether it changed your attitude or the way you reflected on being in the good space, right? Or did it not? Did
I think then I realised, it's always been really good. So whereas before I probably hadn't like actively thought anything about it because I hadn't experienced like this. So, and it's, but then I think, do I want to go back to that? Well, actually, no, because I quite like this. Like, not that, and it's, I think it's this thing, is it good or bad, or is it a fluctuation, or is it just recognising a new piece of yourself? Or I don't know. I think I'm now not seeing it as quite as clear cut as like good, bad, or like that, or I want to get back to that place.
Hence that, right? Because all you're saying is actually it's just different.
It's just different,
and it's an opportunity to grow.
It is.
Right?
It is a real
Absolutely,
opportunity to grow, and seeing it positive. So actually, I'm kind of like, in a way, it's almost better than what the best was because it's like, wow, there's all this other things that you can feel and experience, and actually that's the richness of it. It's and you can relate, I guess, better to other people maybe who have or you can share and discuss. And I think having more open conversations has been something that has been really useful, and just those reflections and having that, because it was all really for me about physical health, tracking, and actually having this experience has really pushed me to think about mental health much more, because I didn't maybe I just not an assumption, but because I wasn't prompted to think about it, and this has prompted
the
me
guidance now we're talking about.
So that guidance, because actually there isn't really anything, there's lots of response mode stuff too, but there's not a lot of
but proactive.
It's like prevention and intervention. We talk about that a lot, don't we?
And how do you do that? Is it important to sort of have checkpoints that, so say the physical health tracking that I would sit in the morning and type in the stuff, people wrote diaries but in the past, do people handwrite diaries now? I don't know, recordings, or capturing how you feel is actually as important as capturing like how many steps you've done, or what you ate for breakfast.
Absolutely.
And
that's the journey we're on.
It is.
And I guess I'm going to put you on the spot now. the last question, and it is all about capturing how you feel and creating awareness and empowerment in our users at You Understood. And you've had our prototype for the last few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So we're obviously super impressed with all the work and the research that you do, and we're hoping you'll stick around with us on the journey for a little bit. We would love to know what you think of our aspirations, what you think of us. Not us personally, because that might go down a big hole somewhere that we don't want to get into right here. No, let's not open that door. But just what you think of what we're trying to do, and given your experience, let's have it.
I think it's. I mean, it's from day one, from having the introduction. I think it's like well, no one's doing this in this space, and no one's doing. And I think we clicked instantly when we met. I think we've got a lot of common interests and aspirations, and certainly. It's something that is funny, because maybe just personally it's been missing in my, this kind of platform has been missing. And now I'm like, oh, this is a thing that I need, that I didn't know I needed or wanted or could use. So, and I'm, as an early adopter of track, I love, and I think it's a really important thing. And thinking about this guidance, if we could embed this and have this as an opportunity for people to have a platform, have a space to track. And we were talking over lunch there as well about some of the ways that we might do that, and the sort of, I think, like beyond even just the current technology that exists, and I think having that big ambition, and Paul, you talked about the gap and like what moving towards in the direction of travel, but is there ever a destination anyway? Are you going to arrive? Because it's about building that functionality and just keep building and building. So I don't think, that saying it's a prototype, yes, but actually it's more than that, because it's doing that job, or it's doing the work that you want it to do already. And it can build other, you're getting the insights from users and the ways it will adapt and layer. But I think it's really exciting, because I think it started that that it could exist. It does exist. It's it's going to continue to exist, and I think certainly the work that Enya and Wangol are doing as well, bringing different perspectives into that and helping to develop. But I just think it's really exciting, and it's great to have early access. And I know it's not out there for everyone yet, but I think being part of this journey is very exciting, and I'm loving working with you. I'm loving that. That we do click and connect, and that is a personal thing as well.
You need to get the tissue out, because but
it's so about relationship, and it's just the conversations that we've had about the things that's important to reflect on and to have the opportunities to do, and I think we're all on board with it. But I don't think we're just patting each other on the back and reinforcing it for each other. I think it really deeply connects with our experiences, with our professional backgrounds, with our expertise, our interests. And I think a genuine, I talked about applied health sciences is getting stuff out there that's useful, making a difference. And we've got huge problems with mental health. I mean, even some work I did with ambulance service a few years ago, one of the key things that people dial 999 for is mental health crises, and is 999 the right place? Yeah, and we're waiting to the point that people are in crisis point, and then they, do they have any data or any understandings of themselves? It's like that path. And if we can help people through encouraging and supporting use of technology to be able to do that, then it can make everyone's got a mobile phone, really. It's just
like you say, it's preventing crisis for someone through their own awareness.
Yes, and it's empowering, because how disempowering to be like, I don't know what else to do apart from phone an ambulance because there's something happening in my head, and that is, and there's no, you can call an ambulance because you've broken your leg and someone can put it back together and plaster you up and send you home, and you can walk again in 6 weeks' time. But you can't, mental health isn't, that needs that more active engagement with it on a day-to-day basis that empowers people to recognise patterns for themselves and to see that in their own data and to own it and to own the ups and downs. And we talk about ups and downs of good or bad, and I don't know, that's life's journey, but if you can capture some of it and use it in a way that
is powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really powerful.
You've just said something that I guess we don't talk about enough, which is the ownership thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and we definitely don't talk about that enough. Autonomy,
ownership.
But when you're inputting the data, that's your data, that's your experience, that's your feelings, that's your mental health, it's a self-reflection, and it's yours. It's nobody else's. And that's a really powerful thing, and it starts to give you back a sense of control, even if it's challenging data. That is powerful in itself, and I think preventing, as you just said, is critical
for someone that has, I hope personally for someone that has called 999, that actually might give someone hope that they don't have to do that again. Maybe. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Heather, Annie, thank you so much for joining us in our posh podcast room. And
guitar next time, right?
Guitar next time, maybe. Eddie's gonna play.
I was raising in agreement with the. I was like, yes. Two votes. Yes.
Gonna play.
You're in trouble.
It's 3-1. 3-1.
We really appreciate it. We really do. We're very, very touched by it. We really appreciate the support. And you talked about, we're not just patting ourselves on the back. I can testify every time I'm in the same room as NA, I get the hardest time ever.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Paul.
Yeah, she keeps them grounded. Yeah.
But in all seriousness, what you brought, Wongle have brought, and what you're bringing is just fantastic. The breadth, the different ways to look at things really broadens out what we're doing, doesn't it? And the more eyes you have on something through that lived experience, and the more creativity and ideas that come, we're excited about that, because it will make it the best possible piece of technology that we can provide today. But equally, one of the things to close off on, is we absolutely don't want to just be technology led. Right.
Yeah.
And this is why we're all sat here,
yep.
Talking about it. I think people consume the narrative around mental health and learn from that in many different ways. And this is one of those channels. Technology will be another, and there are 100 others. And we recognize that. And I think it's really important that we're not single stream on reaching out to our users.
I think as well that working with you as well is really important for me in my sort of professional role and as a researcher and as an academic, because it feeds back in like, what kinds of questions do we need to be asking? What kinds of studies do we need to be doing? How is measurement important, or how do we understand these concepts and practices better, and how can we do the research in the university as well to then feed back into that? So it's more of a process, a loop, and a relationship, a collaboration, and I think that's really beautiful. And I think that we can even have conversations like this coming from our different backgrounds and coming, you know, our different hats on that we have is just incredible. So thank you so much for inviting us and for working with us too, because it's fantastic.
Appreciate it.
Super.
Awesome.
All right.
Good.
Good.
It's a wrap.
Sorry.
What are you doing?
You're waiting the whole time.
It's a wrap.
Yeah, we're-
It's a wrap.